we're locking the doors. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to this little Zoom soiree to welcome We Peeked at Paper into the world. It's an oral history of British zines. I thought it'd be nice to get to know our authors a little bit. So we've got Gavin and we've got Hamish. Hamish, let's start with you. What got you into zines? What was your first one?
I was very into Sparks. I was into music. I started getting into older bands when I was probably about 15 or so, got massively into Sparks. So Record Collector was the big magazine for that sort of thing. And I got into record collecting as well. And I realized like there were zines advertised in there. They all tended to be like about a single artist, I used to get one about Frank Zappa, one about Jack Kerouac, and I guess that got me thinking I could do my own zine. It'd be fun because I used to do like little magazines just for fun as a kind of hobby. I like writing, and I did one about Sparks. And I guess during the time I was starting to do that, I was only aware of like these fanzines about specific artists, you know, but at some point I sort of realized there was a whole bigger world out there about zines where people were producing them and writing about lots of different acts, sometimes about a certain sort of genre like punk or whatever. And, you know, I guess as my interest sort of broadened from Sparks to other bands and even, you know, things other than music, I wanted to write about a lot of other things. So I thought I'd do a more general fanzine. So I started doing that. And that was, so my Sparks fanzine only lasted for one issue. But I started a general fanzine called Saudage, which was, there was a lot of Sparks content in that as well. But I also had loads of other things. And I actually started getting more and more interested in more of the content of my fanzine was becoming other fanzines. And the fanzine reviews were like a bigger part of Saudage. Anyway, I was sort of, I produced, I guess, 5 issues in about 3 to 4 years. And then it's the way of these things. I was sort of immersed in it very, very, you know, where fanzines were my main concern for those 3 or 4 years. And then, you know, you get another interest, and I sort of dropped out of that point and didn't really have much to do with fanzines for, you know, years and years after that.
Gav, what about you?
I was kind of lucky because I was a music fan as well, but didn't know about fanzines really, and didn't get them until I was at sixth form college, so I was about 17 or so. I had a friend in my philosophy class who was into really good music. She used to do these compilation tapes with all these bands that were kind of quite obscure, bands that would get played on Peel and stuff that I didn't really know so well. And I always thought she had really good taste. And one day she came into college and she thrust a fanzine at me and said, "Oh, this is my mate Pete's fanzine. Would you like to buy it?" And because Roz was pretty cool, and I was like, yeah, if it was, you know, good enough for her, that was all right for me. And it turned out to be Pete Perfides, who was obviously now sort of well-known music journalist, and it was his fanzine Perturbed. So that was the first one I got, and I really liked it, but I still wasn't really plugged into that world. And I used to see them now and again, and you know, occasionally get them from the back of the music papers and at gigs and stuff. And then one day, a few years later, around about 89, 90, something like that, when Hamish's fanzine came out. So that's how we became friends. I saw an advert in the music papers or the Record Collector or something. I think there was like a Morrissey thing in there. I think They Might Be Giants were probably featured, and a couple of other things. And I thought, oh, that looks quite interesting. So I got that, and then we became sort of good pen friends on the back of that, and got to know each other a little bit. And I think after a couple of issues, it made me think, oh, actually, I could do this as well, and I could sort of get to be a little part of this world. So I did an interview with a local band in Middlesbrough, a band called Shrug, and I interviewed interview Pete Pavides, who's fanzine a book, but also Rob Nichols from Shrug, who does a fanzine called Fly Me to the Moon, the football fanzine. They're both in the book. So yeah, I interviewed. Sorry, I'm getting weird feedback. Are we all right? Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I like that.
Yeah, it was quite spacey.
We went down the Zine tunnel then.
I interviewed Shrug for Hamish's fanzine, and then after that point, I thought actually I could do it myself as well. So I did a couple of issues. I think from around about 91, 92, something like that. I did Bag of Tricks and Candy Sticks, issue 1 and 2, and just looking at them, I mean, they've got all the big names in here. We've got Phyllis April King, who was Ivor Cutler's muse and partner, Len Liggins from the Ukrainians, Ted Chippington, you know, so very much names for the teenage market of today in many ways. Issue 2, we've got Silverfish, Levitation, Monochrome Set Wedding Present. So a lot of kind of the stuff that might have been in the weekly music papers, but yeah, a few kind of slightly left field choices as well. And I mean, a bit like Hamish, really, after that, I kind of drifted away from the world of fanzines. I'm still buying them for a few more years, but it just takes such a big commitment and it's a lot of effort. And, you know, I'm really impressed. We were talking, for anyone that joined a little bit later, we were talking to Arlo, who's Pint-Sized Punk, who's also interviewed in the book. He's done about 17 fanzines in about 2.5 years, which I just think is incredible because, like I said, I did those too. And I was like, after that, I was like, I think that's probably enough. And then I got a full-time job, you know, and I was teaching, and I was like, oh, I leave these childish things behind me. So,
so fast forward, however many years, where does this idea come from to do the book?
Well, I had the idea. I don't know why I was sort of revived an interest in fanzines. I guess the only fanzine I was seeing was actually a football fanzine, and but it got me thinking, you know, what sort of fanzines are still going in the age of the internet, and I thought it could be an interesting sort of book. One thing is, I really like long interviews. I've always liked the interview format. There's a sort of book that I had in mind, and there's a couple of books by Simon Garfield that sort of, you know, typify the sort of book that I wanted to produce, where he did one called The Wrestling and another called The Nation's Favourite. And the first one was like about wrestlers from the 70s. And it's all, you know, original interviews that he did, and he kind of intersperses them. And what I rather like about it is that you're not just getting the story, but you're getting the patterns of speech of the people, and you get to know them as people, not just from what they're saying, but the way they're saying it. So, you know, I thought we could do that for a book about zines, and I thought what I hoped would happen was we'd find very, very diverse, totally different stories, but maybe a little bit of commonality. And I was interested in, you know, each story in itself, but also how much common ground was there between these editors, and in what ways were, you know, the experiences of a sci-fi fanzine editor from the mid-70s similar to, you know, what Arlo's doing with Pint-Sized Punk. So that's one of the, yeah, and I think we didn't have too, you know, clear an idea of what we wanted to do when we started out. Gavin got started. In fact, when we started, Gavin was going to be probably the sole author, but it kind of made sense one way and another for me to become involved after he'd done a few interviews. We were finding, you know, Gavin's up in Sheffield. There were a few people we could interview down in the south. Made much more sense for me to be able to do those, and I'm really glad I did, because it's been such a sort of fantastic experience meeting all the editors. I feel like I've learned something from every one of them, you know, and they are all completely unique stories.
Well, you've gone out and actually met them all face to face.
Yeah,
which in this digital age, yeah.
COVID period was like probably about half of the time we spent interviewing, but we stuck to it because I didn't want to do just like phone interviews or email interviews or Zoom interviews. part of it was just sort of finding out a little bit about the environment they were in, and going to a bit more trouble to, speak to them.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a bit of commitment, isn't it, and a bit of an adventure too, to do that face-to-face thing. It shows a real commitment and like a nice kind of pure ideology at the heart of the book, which I think was important. And so even when COVID came up and we were thinking, oh, this is going to delay things, but Hamish and I both agreed that we shouldn't then just change and go to Zoom, that it was important to kind of keep that initial idea. So although it made it a little harder in some ways, I'm really glad I did it. And as Hamish said, it was just it was great to kind of meet people face to face and have that little, just that kind of fun of meeting people and sitting across a table from people for an hour or two and get to chat to them. And also we wanted the photographs in the book as well, which was an important factor.
What became the theme, we didn't set out with any sort of mandate, but one thing probably came from me more than Gavin, but was this sort of anti-internet theme. And the whole title of it, We Peaked at Paper, was because we kind of decided we were going to say our position. We weren't going to be too prescriptive about what a zine is, but I wasn't going to accept that like anything online was a proper zine. It has to be printed, and I think going along with that, I became more and more anti-digital. I mean, I was anti-digital. I suppose I imposed it on the project more and more, and it became a real point of principle. We're going to meet these people. We're going to take the train or the coach or whatever,
or by horse and carriage, whatever method.
Yeah, I mean the book goes in some quite granular detail about how the whole fanzine process, to getting it started, to writing, to duplicating, and the whole selling of it and stuff. And I think that's something that kind of links everything as you're going throughout the book. But Hamish, you mentioned that that you were trying to find this common thread. And I guess that this is probably a question to both of you. Do you think there is a common thread that links, the different fanzine makers, the different subjects that are covered in zines? What is that common thread?
Well, I mean, a lot of them did say independently, that they would take fanzines to gigs to sell, but then were too shy to approach anyone. And I mean, that to me is like the characteristic of a fanzine editor. They're quite introspective, and I think there are exceptions to that. That's probably not the case for Arlo. It's probably not the case for Stuart Home, who did sell all his fanzines at the gigs. But I think a lot of them are people who perhaps aren't very gregarious, and are kind of passionately into what they're into, music for a lot of them, but it could be football, it could be something else. And their way of communication, even before the internet, the fanzine would have been a way of reaching, fellow spirits,
I think as well, in terms of themes, something that kind of runs through the book quite a bit is an idea of reinvention of people. As Hamish said, a typical fanzine writer is generally maybe a little shy and introspective, but I think being an editor of your own zine gives you the opportunity to almost become another character in a way and become more confident. And I know in Pete's interview, for example, people may have read Broken Greek, which is a really good autobiography he's written, and he's quite a shy character. But as a fanzine editor, he's ringing up the tour manager of the Bangles, demanding an interview, and he's like 18 years old. And when I was talking to Hamish, he was talking about banging on doors of backstage at gigs, trying to get, because there's no answer, and he's like hammering on, and people changing names as well. Karen Ablaze, strange enough, Ablaze isn't a real surname, but it's almost like a musician, changing a name to become like a new person. So I think there's that. And also I was kind of surprised, because before the book I wouldn't really have thought about friendship being a theme, but again, it's something that runs through several of the interviews, like Sean and Nikki. I don't know if Nikki's here today, but they did How to Win Friends and Influence People, and that was really based on their friendship together and just having fun and so on. And like Mark Hodkinson, who he spoke to, his thing was really about he had a band and they did the fanzine as a band, and it was a way of kind of galvanizing them and trying to kind of get more people to join their tribe a little bit. So I think they're really important things as well. Like I say, that spirit of friendship and reaching out and communicating and finding more like-minded souls, which obviously pre-internet was a lot harder to do.
Yeah, you do get a sense of that, particularly the opening chapter that goes a bit more into the history of it, with all the sci-fi things going right back to the 1930s. But I came up with an equation. I'm not a mathsy sort of person, so consider this algebra, because it's all letters. But certainly for music zines, which is my knowledge of zines, I've got John Peel plus smash hits equals zine. And that seems to be something that I think John Peel's mentioned quite a lot in the book. Smash It seems to be something that, particularly the mid to late 80s, something that influences people putting together scenes. But that's kind of from the music side of things. But other subjects that are covered in zines. What did you uncover? What did you discover that you didn't know there was ever a zine on?
Well, I think. As we got further into it, we realized there was this big history. There's a lot of there is a certain literature about zines already, and a lot of it is sort of saying that punk was, what started the zine revolution, and Sniffing Glue in particular. So we felt it important to include Sniffing Glue in our book, but I guess in the course of doing that, we were aware there was like an earlier history, and especially these science fiction fanzines. And so I thought it was important to have one chapter where we cover that. And in a way, it's slightly imbalanced because, we're there covering sort of 40 years of history before the rest of the chapters even start. And it's so interesting, that whole history of, I'm not interested in science fiction at all, but when I interviewed Rob Hansen, the science fiction zine editor, to me it was just fascinating just how they were doing it, before photocopiers were around. What were they using to print it on? Things like that, how are they dispersing it? And there were all these different machines, the Gestetner, the Spirit Duplicator, these different ways of producing it. So that chapter's there a lot about that. But all the different periods of zine history, I think they have a certain character. So punk is very, very important, but then post-punk follows hot on the heels of it. And that's incredibly important as well, because there was Crass, who were incredibly influential. This is before my time, but I came to realize how important Crass were for many fanzine editors like Mark Hodkinson. But there was a whole generation of fanzines that were really indebted to Crass, and probably turned people on to anarchism, and then you got C86 around the period of the Smiths, and then a little bit later, around the time me and Gavin were doing our zines, you got the Riot Girl zines, and feminism becomes more of an issue. So there's all these distinct periods, and it's really nice to see the way these trends sort of happen. And that was one of the things I enjoyed, in putting the book together, was learning all of that and constructing a sort of chronology of how these phases happened.
Yeah, because it's almost it's not just an oral history; it's like a social history, in a way, but it's these. It's representing voices, opinions, scenes, or whatever, that's not being covered by the mainstream press, media, whatever you would want to call it. I mean, Rhodri Marsden and the chapter with him, he admits to being willfully obscure in the stuff that he wants to cover. And you just mentioned there, Hamish, that the Riot Girl, the fanzines from the early 90s, and you have covered quite a few zines that were started up and run by women, and probably not best place to comment on these things being white middle-aged men, but how important is that? How significant is that? I mean, do you want to say a few words about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I can't sort of comment on what it's like the experience of being a woman, but I didn't want to sort of neglect the fact that Riot Girl was an incredibly important movement, for one thing. And also, I mean, even to this day, gender issues, which have broadened out from feminism to become more broad, there's still a big topic of a lot of fanzines. And, as I say, I can't sort of comment on it from my own experience, but I recognise that I want to include them in the book. Part of what the book was about was to include as broader sort of range in every respect. So we wanted to cover a large time period, but also subject matter, and in terms of where the zines were being edited, we wanted to include a lot from, not just from London or near where Gavin is or anything like that, but from all over the country, as far as that was practicable. I mean, in 20 interviews, it's not really possible to be really comprehensive about it, but I think we probably got the balance about as good as we could have. We've certainly got a good representation of female zine editors. We probably haven't got as good a representation of non-white zine editors as I would have liked, really. But in some ways that perhaps reflects, zine history, covering a large period. The demographic of the UK has changed quite a bit. And looking back around the age of punk, it would have been, I think, impossible to find a non-white zine editor,
Yeah, and like I say, I would associate zines with music, but there's this whole, the football side of things seems to be huge. I don't do sport, so enlighten me, Gavin. What's your experience of sporty zines?
Well, yeah, I mean, we interview Rob and Dave, who both did football fanzines in the book QPR and Middlesbrough. But while we were, like in one of the chapters, we were looking at other obscure fanzines, and I just saw the page then, sort of other sporting ones, and we found examples of cricket ones, and there's a very I would say interesting one that was advertised for a long time in 14 Times, a wrestling zine, which is it's quite specific, quite odd, quite unusual, but yeah, there's that. Cricket ones, there's drag racing ones. So I mean, I think that's the great thing about fanzines, is you can write a fanzine or a zine about any subject. I think Selina's on the call, who we interview in the book, and she's done them about sweet shops and crisp flavors, as well as maybe more serious matters around sort of class and that kind of thing. So that's the fascinating thing, because it's your thing, you're editing it, you decide what goes into it, so it can be as niche and as specific or as broad as you want it to be.
Yeah, I've started about 6 scenes in my head while I've been reading the book, so it's been inspiring me. Yeah, I mean, there's a question here from David. He says, just wondering if the authors established a period of time which was peak zine.
Well, I guess, like Hamish said, really, there's different periods. So I think, you were talking about John Peel and Smash Hits before. So John Peel was very much part of that kind of C86 kind of zine explosion, kind of, post-punk and indie pop and so on, perhaps up to the 90s. I mean, I don't know, I would say, because that's the period I grew up collecting zines, maybe from late 80s to mid 90s, when the internet kind of started encroaching on things. But I'm aware that's probably just because I'm a person of a certain age, and, the time when you were that age and experiencing it is in your head what you think the peak age for zines is. I'm sure there's lots of young people now that think, no, actually, this is great because you can find zines really easily on Etsy. You don't have to go to gigs. You don't have to get little bits of flyers and paper in envelopes and find out about things. Everything's easily accessible. So I think it very much depends on who's judging it. Like I say, for me personally, yeah, that period, but that's probably.
I would say 76 to 2000, really, because I think punk did usher in a real explosion in fanzines. The sci-fi zines were around before that, but there were almost no zines on other subjects. And then, with punk, there were suddenly loads of zines. Maybe because, photocopying then became, a sort of a cheap commodity and an easy way to make a zine. But and then that continued all through. You can trace the history. I don't think there was a lull all the way through the 90s, 80s and 90s. And then obviously the internet, I say around 2000, that was when the internet was really widely accessible and everyone had access to it all the time. And a lot of people probably who would have done a zine were starting to do blogs and things like that. And that's when the world started going to hell in a handcart.
Well, we've got a few zine types on, so I don't know if we to throw it open, if anybody's got any comments, questions, anything like that. You can put your cameras on, put your mics on. If anybody's got anything to share, to contribute, I think now is a good time. I think. Hello, everyone who's switching on your cameras.
Well,
You're right there, John.
I am, yeah. I was just going to say, well, first off, I'm sorry, I missed the very start of this, but hats off to the pair of you, because it sounds like a lot of work, and it's a great achievement to bring out any book, so congratulations.
Thanks very much.
And you might have covered this already, but I just wondered, what's the state of play with zines at the moment? Are they still a thing outside the internet, or have you talked about this already? If you have.
No, we've not really talked about that. I mean, I think Hamish said in one of his answers, the kind of part of the reason for doing the book as well was to find out a little bit about, what the zine world is like now. And zines are still a thing, but it's just very different to the way it was, before the internet. I found the best way of buying fanzines now was going to zine fairs.
Right.
And every kind of city and a lot of towns have, fairly regular zine fairs, which are good. People table there and might often share a table. Right. And also Etsy, you can buy lots on there.
Yeah, there are loads on Etsy. I mean, the internet is like we say in the book, where we don't count like e-zines as proper zines, but a lot of people are selling paper zines using the internet. So, and there's not really the same sort of outlets that there used to be, except in the world of football fanzines, where there is still a ready audience, and you can still go to the ground and. I mean, there aren't as many. This is sort of covered in the two football fanzine editors interviews that we have in the book, but they're not selling as many, but they are still selling a lot. And it is sort of it's almost a semi-professional type of zine, because you can sell enough at a single match to make a reasonable amount of money.
That's good to know. That's good to know. My supplementary question, which has got nothing to do with my previous question, is: did you try or indeed get to speak to James Brown? Because I remember Attack on Bazag as being quite an influential zine, and I know people who were interviewed by him at that time who sort of saw that he was made for greater things from that time, which is quite interesting, because he was a bit of a prodigy, really. was very young when he did it. I know that, and I know that he was tenacious and it was almost like a smooth passage from that to becoming editor of NME and what have you. So was James involved at all?
No, funnily enough, I've had a few Twitter conversations with him because he's just got a book out, and I think he'd seen We Peaked at Paper somewhere, and he got in touch and said there's quite a lot about fanzines in his recent autobiography. He gets mentioned quite a few times in the index, but I think we had a lot from that kind of period of that sort of mid 80s kind of thing. So. And also people that then
knowledge as well, or certainly in my case, I mean, when you just mentioned James Brown, I immediately thought of the Godfather of Soul. I didn't immediately think of Attack on Kazakh, but he did
set up a company called I Feel Good, so he did trade on that, But
I think as well there was several people in the book of that kind of age who'd gone on to go to be music journalists as well. So I think it was just we felt we'd probably kind of got enough of that kind of angle.
That does raise the question then: is there going to be a volume 2?
That'd be really nice.
We peaked at more paper.
I've definitely got ideas about people I'd like to interview if we were to do it. But it's been an incredible time commitment for me and Gav, and it'd be difficult for either of us to do it. But let's not.
Again, hats off for what you've done.
Yeah. Well, once you've peaked, you've then got to plateau. So,
we plateaued.
We plateaued at paper. Well, we've got Arlo on, who's doing 17 issues and counting of his fanzine Pint Size Punk. Arlo, do you want to tell us a little bit about that? Why you started it? When you started it?
I started it in lockdown because my school was using this really rubbish website that didn't work at all. So because my mum's an English and maths teacher, she was like, right, well, that's not working, so you've got to do something. And she's like, right, for English, what do you want to write about? And I was like, music. And because we know a couple people who've made zines, I had the idea that we could do it like them, because they'd had zines with amazing launch parties that the zines were never actually released. Never got round to it. So I think the best thing about having a zine is when you print it out, then you get the first one just in your hands. You kind of just spend a while just oh my god, I have made this.
Yeah.
That's true. I think that answer came up a few times in some of the interviews when I asked people about what the best moment of being a zine editor had been, and I think it was that when you get the first issue and
such a good feeling,
and it's such a great feeling. It's you can't ever replicate that again.
No, I've got the first issue ever printed still up in my room.
Keep hold of it.
Frame it.
That one day.
On your wall.
And what sort of things do you cover in the zine?
I kind of the music I like is punk and new post-punk mainly. So a lot of Bristol bands, but there's also been a few bigger bands that I hadn't really heard of, to be honest, until I interviewed them.
There's a strong Marmite theme as well, isn't there?
Oh yeah, there's lots of Marmite. Everyone I speak to, I have to get their opinion on Marmite, and then I put it in a little chart at the end. I'll see if I can find one quickly.
You have to find the Marmite chart, ladies and gentlemen.
See, I'd want to know about the Vegemite as well.
That's very niche. That.
Yeah.
I was just going to come while Arlo's gone to get the Marmite chart. John, you were asking before about zines. There is as well in the book a handy kind of resource section that Hamish and I put together, mainly Hamish to be honest, of places you can get fanzines and online distributors as well. There's a great one in Manchester called Pen Fight, and there's other ones and various kind of independent shops that still stock a lot. So
So
It's thriving. That's good to know.
Yeah.
So over to Arlo for the latest on Marmite.
Is much more important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the Marmite chart.
Top work.
This is the love sides, but it had to go over to like 1.5 pages because Marmite's so good. And these are the haters who I try to distance myself from.
Quite right too.
You can see immediately how many people Arlo's interviewed. I mean, it's amazing.
Hugely impressive.
But that's over loads of like issues. So like when you look at it, there's only a few people each issue, really.
Yeah.
Over
That's nice.
17 issues. You know, look, Gav made it to 2.
Yeah.
There's some people in the book. You know, it's been like a handful.
I was going to say we've got Karen on. Hi, Karen. I think Karen did maybe 12. How many ablaze as well are in the end, Karen? About 13, 14?
11. I'm working
11.
on a new one.
Wow.
Yeah, there was one. There was much more recently, didn't you?
Yeah, I did one in 2015. So yeah,
So 7-year gap.
Yeah, and then before that, I guess it was a sort of, I don't know what's from 1993 to 2015. That's 18 years or something.
Well, irregularity is the way of the zine.
Yeah.
But I mean, reading through the book, I don't know if you've seen it yet, Karen, but ablaze is mentioned a lot. It's one of those things that seems to be really have influenced people, particularly, you know, obviously late 80s, early 90s when you were putting it out. I mean, were you aware at the time that you were reaching a lot of people and that you may be influencing people?
Yeah, I mean, like I was saying to Gavin, like, you know, I was really ambitious and I was kind of in the game to, like, you know, sell the most fanzines and stuff. So I was kind of conscious of that kind of sort of dominating thing that we were doing.
There's a real sort of snowball effect, you know, because that was like when Ablaze was at its peak was when I was doing my fanzine, and there are a few fanzines that you kept hearing about, and you then think, oh, I've got to get that one. There was like yours, Grim Humor was another big one around that period, you know, and Tongue in Cheek was another one. They're the three that I remember as like the big ones from around the period when I was producing my fanzine. But yeah, I mean, definitely had that feeling. You've got to read Ablaze.
Yeah, there's a lovely quote from the interview with Karen in this. I'll just read you this little bit. It's great because she talked about making a little zine called Paranoia 86 and giving it out in college to 5 people. She photocopied five of them. And I remember when I interviewed you, and you kind of mimed these people just actually reading what you'd written and how important it was to you. And you said, someone's listening to me. They won't listen to me when I speak, but if I write it down and type it up, they think it's important. It was like a drug. I was addicted for the next 7 years, trying to make it on a bigger scale every time, daring too big, print more, make it bigger. World domination.
I'm having a similar experience right now because it was yesterday I was on the phone to a bloke from Watford who prints all the papers, about talking to him about like getting something like in like basically a newspaper printed. So we were on the phone for about half an hour, during which time I just got like feverishly excited because I realized the power of, you know, of harnessing like, you know, slightly different medium. What really got me going actually was when I asked him the turnaround time for printing, because I'm used to, you know, doing books and magazines. It takes like a couple of weeks at the printers, doesn't it? If you're lucky.
Yeah.
And basically it's, well, we know how long newspapers take to print. It's not weeks, it's not days, it's hours. You know, you send them the files, you approve the proofs, that goes onto plates, and they just print it. and it's made me extremely giddy to think about the possibility of doing that. And also today I've realized that the format that I'm looking at, like a tabloid, that's what the NME was in the 80s. So I've just got like very
Like
I've got the same kind of like power thirst for power, through publishing thing going on again.
yeah.
I think Carpenter's put an interesting comment here. It says, us illustrators get taught about and encouraged to make zines. Hello. At art school, pretty much anything you can think of has a zine, even if the creators can't produce paper versions. So, I mean, that's kind of like, in this environmentally conscious world that we live in now, do we need to start thinking beyond paper? But certainly the aesthetic of the zine is something that's carried through. I mean, you think back to even like Jamie Reed's artwork for the Sex Pistols and stuff like that has that real sort of zine feel to it, and it is its own aesthetic in a way.
I have artist friends that have made both zines that are, it was like a poetry zine that was like individual cards in a cassette tape box, which is like just super analog. And then they've also done zines that are essentially like weird video games. And
Yeah.
it's like, it's like,
To be honest,
there's
like
bizarre,
totally
vast
free of
spectrum.
zines, because I mean, I know like the art world is sort of much more into zines now than it used to be, and that's like, it's a bit like the way there were, the football fanzines became so popular. Now there are art zines, and it's I don't know. I mean, it's probably similar to something that used to have been produced in the art world, but now they're calling it a zine. And you come back to that question, which some ways we were trying to avoid, but some ways we came back to again and again. What exactly is a zine, and how can you say it's a zine rather than a pamphlet or a chapbook or just an art object? You can have a very broad definition, or you can have a very narrow one. Some people are only interested in punk zines or something like that. And
yeah, well, William Potter from Cud, who did the zine Groin, Gav asked him what makes a fanzine a fanzine. And I like William's answer. He says, I think it has to be something created by fans, something that's cheap, a little bit crude, but with a lot of heart in it. There doesn't need to be any design knowledge. Enthusiasm is enough. It's the same with fan sites. They do the job of zines now. They're put together by people eager to share their enthusiasm and meet other people into the same stuff as them. So I thought that was a nice little definition of zines there. And Brian's question: if you were to choose to create a zine today about a current musical artist, who would it be? So, Hamish, would you return to Sparks, or would you go somewhere else?
I was thinking of doing another issue of the Sparks zine, just because I thought it would be an unprecedentedly long gap between two issues of the same zine. It would be over 35 years. I don't think anyone's left it that long to do a second issue. So purely for that reason, I was thinking of doing a Sparks, another issue of the Tacky Tiger. That was the title. But I don't know whether that will happen.
Gav, what about you?
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, it's so much harder. It would be harder to choose now if it'd been sort of before the internet and the kind of the sort of heritage publishing that goes on with a lot of bands now. I'd love to do a big thing on the Fall, but then there's a new record collector special just come out on them, or a Mojo special. So I think I would do something that does. I'll try and choose something that's not covered by mainstream. So I might do a genre like the kind of records you buy in charity shops. That might be a good topic for a fanzine. So it's not a particular band, but something musical. And like I say, you've really got to try and. The thing about a good fanzine is I think it's doing the job that the mainstream press isn't. So I think that'd be a fun thing to do. Kind of go through, rate and review every James Last album, and
that's one of my ideas.
Yeah, right, okay.
I've been listening to them today.
It'd be very niche. I think it would have a very select readership, but yeah, that'd be fun.
Theremins and saw music.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, just reviewing. We could dedicate a whole issue to James' last version of Hawkwind's Silver Machine. I think that would be be a good thing. Nikki's put. When does a political pamphlet become a zine?
Yeah, that's
because I
think you've answered that. I think that was being answered as I was typing.
Okay.
Almost.
Yeah, because I was at Glossop Labour Club last night to treat everybody to the Blade Runner soundtrack, and there were in the entrance. And while I've had my zine on head on this week, independently produced pamphlets, little magazines, things like that. And I was looking at it and thinking, are these zines? Can these be zines?
Yeah, a lot of the zines that are like sold as zines now, if you go to like Pen Fight, for example, they are sort of one-off things. I mean, one of the things that I brought into this whole question when we're talking about is it a zine or is it not a zine, if it's got an issue number, then it's like a periodical. Then I think that's a good hallmark for what is a zine. But then you got to say, okay, if it hasn't got that, does that mean it's not a zine? I don't really want to say that, but then, there is no sort of fixed dividing line between a one-off zine and a pamphlet, really. You could call it either.
Yeah, it's a very grey area.
Yeah,
sure.
Carpenter just mentioned the Dada manifestos. There's been an early zine.
Yeah, we talked a little bit as well in the book about sort of the underground press of the 60s and whether they were zines, but I think we felt they probably weren't, just because there was a lot of money behind some of them, and kind of an editorial board and that kind of thing, and we felt that wasn't really quite in keeping. But you could argue in a way they were fanzines. So all we can say after 5.5 years of research on this is we don't know. Just being honest, guys. I mean, still buy the book, but yeah.
Yeah, Hamish, can I just ask one more question?
Yeah.
Hello. Did you have an anecdote from all of your interviews that, well, basically, what was the best story you were told relating, and that kind of sums up the zine ethos, if you like? I'm a big one for favourite stories, really. But what was the best yarn you were told over the time?
Right. I mean, nothing comes to mind. The only thing I can say is that there are hundreds and hundreds of them, and so it would be doing the book a disservice to just pick one.
Choose your favourite child.
I think
we all have one.
Go to the Boat Whistle website and order a copy. There's
done it already.
Marvelous.
Yeah, no, I mean, if anything did come to mind, then I would have said, but I don't have any favourite stories. I mean, I was browsing through the book, just for about an hour before we went online today, and I was just really enjoying sort of refreshing my memory about some of the conversations we were having. But a lot of it, they're not sort of blockbuster stories where riotous events happen. There is much more sort of low levels kind of stuff, much more nuanced, and that's what I think is quite characteristic of the world of zines. So there's quite a lot of conversation about the intricacies of using Letraset, for example.
Oh yeah.
I wouldn't quite call that a blockbuster anecdote, but I mean, to me, it's quite interesting.
Yeah,
fair enough.
But what you've done there, John, is I asked a similar question earlier in the week. I was sort of leafing through, and basically, I may as well have just asked them to choose their favourite child.
Yeah, exactly. They're very loyal, aren't they? Very loyal.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
So any more questions or any more contributions from the zine types that we have amongst our gathering tonight?
I see Selena's there. I don't know if Selena wants to say anything or about what she's working on now, or hi Selena.
Hello.
Hello, sorry. I don't know. I've enjoyed this, and yeah, I don't know. I like hearing about all the different things people put in zines, because obviously you mentioned that I've made 2 zines about crisps, which tend to be...
Is there going to be another issue of that?
Maybe, because weirdly enough, that's like my most popular zine I've ever made. In like the 20 plus years I've been making zines, crisp zines is what the people want.
It's important stuff.
Yeah, it's what, you know, people want to know what your favourite crisps are. Oh, Marmite, yes or no? In crisps or not in crisps, Arlo? Is that the question? In crisp form or not in crisp form?
They did a Marmite crisp. So,
Yeah. I do like Marmite. The Marmite crisp I wasn't too fussed, but I am a Marmite fan, yes.
I once had a Marmite cheese and onion crisp sandwich. It sounds horrible, but it's one like the best.
No, that sounds good to me. That sounds like a perfect sandwich.
Yeah, Selena, you like crisp sandwiches, don't you?
Yeah, I love a crisp sandwich, and I feel like I've not tried. I do like cheese and Marmite, so I feel like if I put cheese onion crisps and Marmite, I think that'd be the one. But in terms of zines I'm making, I actually did just start a mini zine about quiz shows, which may surface, but may not. Yeah, so that was about like quiz shows that I love. And I was on a quiz show once, so it's basically an excuse to talk about myself, as most of my zines are.
Well, you need to speak to Gavin as well. He's been on a quiz show.
Pointless.
Oh, so that's a proper, almost a proper quiz show. Yeah, I was on the hit list. I went out in the first round, so.
Oh.
You're going to say
Gavin's too modest to talk about it.
Yes.
You're going to make a whole zine about it, like me.
Selena, how many? You've done a lot of fanzines. Well, we were talking earlier on about very productive people. That was it. Around about 40, 50 different zines you've done, something like that. Maybe I've done like it's definitely more than 30. I did like 18 of a craft zine that I did with my friend, and we did 10. I've done 10 of a zine about class that I did with my friend, and then I've done 4 of a zine about race. So they're the ones that I've done more than like 1 or 2 of. Yeah, maybe 40, maybe more, because I do zines as part of like running workshops as well. So yeah, I have lost count, but they're a lot more sporadic these days than when I was younger. Yeah, definitely 1 every couple of years as opposed to like 2 a year. So yeah, that's good. So Arlo, you've still got a bit of a way to go to get to 40, but you're starting young. I'm sure you'll get there. Hamish, if anyone wants to buy the book, what could they do?
Well,
if they haven't already ordered one, of course.
Well, they don't absolutely need the internet, but we would prefer that you go to the Boat Whistle website, www.boatwhistle.com, and buy it there. Supporting independent publishing. It's a completely independent publisher, no external funding. It's a hard existence. So yeah, it's £20 very well spent.
Definitely. Well, I think that's probably because we've taken an hour of your lovely people's time so far. I just want to say, lovely to see you all, and those who I've not said hello to. Thank you very much as well, Sean and David and Ali and Fiona and Russell, Sabina. Yeah, thank you for joining us. And if you know anyone who might be interested, Christmases are coming, so point them in the right direction as well.
Excellent.
Shameless. You can tell that you used to sell fanzines.
Yeah. I was a lot shyer when I sold fanzines. Yeah. That's why I ended up with boxes of these things under my bed for years. But I'm determined it's not going to happen this time around. So
that's it. I've got visions of you now going to gigs over the next few months with bags of the book. You say, buy my book.
I am. I'm going to the Louder Than Words Festival in Manchester next month, and I'm going to take a load, and I'm going to try and be a different person. I'm going to reinvent myself from that as a fanzine editor and harangue people till they give me 20 quid.
Well, like Gavin says, thank you everyone to coming. Thank you for Gavin and Hamish for sharing their process on writing this book, and what went into it, and their experiences of the zine world as well. So yeah, we'll bid you all a good Friday night and a good weekend as well.